It's my privilege today to introduce our speaker. We welcome Dylan Terrell, the founder and executive director of Caminos de Agua, an NGO which works in partnership with at-risk communities to obtain adequate supplies of safe, healthy drinking water. In Mexico, 52% of the population live with some sort of water scarcity. That's 67 million Mexicans. And an estimated 10 million have no water service at all. Dylan grew up in the US in a family that greatly emphasized working to create a better world for everyone. He has written that he continues to be inspired by his grandfather's words, quote, "If you're not finding a way to help improve the lives of real people every day, then you're missing the point." In March 2023, Dylan Terrell was named an Ashoka Fellow, a recognition given to the world's leading social entrepreneurs. Ashoka was founded on the idea that the most powerful force for good in the world is a social entrepreneur, a person driven by an innovative idea that can help correct an entrenched global problem. To quote the founder, Bill Drayton, "Social entrepreneurs are not content just to give a fish or to teach how to fish. They will not rest until they have revolutionized the fishing industry." With much gratitude, we proudly welcome Mexico's social entrepreneur for life-saving water, Dylan Terrell.
Thank you so much. That's quite an introduction. I hope I can live up to it here. Let me put my timer on. Otherwise, I'm going to talk to you guys for hours. So, well, thank you all for having me here today. And I, first and foremost, just want to thank UU in general for being such a huge supporter of our organization for so many years now. I think ever since we've existed, the UU has supported us in one way or another. So thank you so much for all you've done for Caminos de Agua and for clean water here in the region. You likely have a lot of questions about water today and maybe how it personally impacts you. I'm going to ask you to put those aside for now. I'm going to do a different sort of talk today, and we will have a Q&A after, and so I'm happy to answer any of those questions later, or you can get in touch with us at a different time. But today I was asked to do a more personal talk. It's something I don't have a whole lot of opportunity to do, so I'm going to give it a shot. Paula Peace reached out to me and asked me some questions. She said, what inspired me to found Caminos de Agua? What keeps me going in the face of disappointments? And what kind of beliefs sustain me in this process? And so I'm going to try to answer those. It's going to be a little bit difficult to be overly personal because on the one side, Caminos de Agua is deeply personal for me. I have a really hard time separating my personal life from Caminos, as my wife can attest. But Caminos is also a profoundly collective effort. We have an incredibly dedicated staff, many of whom are foregoing much larger paychecks to be here to do this work. And we're also a collective community of so many other NGOs, of grassroots community partners, which I'm going to talk a lot about today, but that have built this huge community around this work. So, starting off, I will start off on a personal note, and Paula stole some of my words, but I'm going to say them again anyway in just a moment here. But I need to take a step back because all of this for me personally really does start with my family. It starts with my parents, and especially my grandparents, who dedicated their lives, and my grandma, who's 95 and continues to dedicate her life to other people. And I think about my grandfather specifically. He always said that war and poverty were his two biggest teachers. He grew up in the Great Depression, and he stormed the beaches of Normandy during World War II. And he actually married my grandmother on D-Day, on June 6th, because he said it was important to remember the most horrific, worst day of his life, as well as the best day of his life. We actually think it was just so he wouldn't forget his wedding anniversary, but you'll have that. But those teachers, war and poverty, really pushed him to dedicate his life to social justice. And there was a lot of stories I wanted to share with you about that today, but it was taking up way too much time. So that's for another talk. So I'll just say that reflecting on all those stories as I was kind of preparing for today and thinking about UU, so much of it has come down to really many of UU's core principles, but one that really stuck out to me is the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And I think about that, and I think about what he would say, which is similar, which he often quoted, which is now on his tombstone, which is love thy neighbor. Now, related to those principles, one thing that I did want to share with all of you, and it's something that I've really taken with me through all of this, it wasn't a conversation I had directly with my grandfather, but it was one that he had with his son-in-law, with my father, and they were talking about how you make the world a better place. And my father was involved in all these protests at the moment during the anti-war movements. And he said, look, marching in the streets in protests is fine. It's even important. But if you're not trying to find a way to help real people every single day, then you're missing the point. So fast forwarding a bit, quite a bit actually, I had to figure out what the point was for me. And I spent a lot of time in Guatemala originally, and then after I finished college, I spent 2 years in South America. And there's a lot of stories there, but that's also for another talk. But just to say that they were very formative for me. And what happened is that back in 2009, I got drawn back to Latin America, this time in southern Mexico, in Chiapas, which is the southernmost state of Mexico, where I was working on a sustainable construction project with my father. And that project, not getting into too many specifics, but ultimately didn't take off. And we had realized, in hindsight, that we were introducing a solution to a problem that people didn't identify with as a problem. We had the solution to sustainable housing in southern Mexico, and they were like, we have a lot of problems here, but housing isn't really one of them. So that was a bit discouraging, but again, very formative for me. So about a year later, I found myself here in San Miguel, trying to help out with some workshops. But really what happened is I found myself with a group of other people who were doing similar projects around the world, this kind of international development work. And most of us were outsiders coming in and doing this kind of work, and we all had very similar stories of mistakes and failures, and maybe in some cases of doing more harm than good. And so I was young enough at the time that I didn't want to get too discouraged by it, and so we started to try to find define some simple principles that would allow us to do this work much better. And those ultimately really became the core foundational principles of Caminos de Agua. Without going into all of them, we have a lot now. But just to say, one of the early ones is that a lot of us, not myself included, but the organization has always had a very technical wing of it. And this idea of trying to develop these low-tech and low-cost technologies to these really challenging problems. And one thing that we saw was this really unfortunate tendency of development organizations to develop technologies for poor people. These technologies that are good enough for a certain sector of society, but things that, we don't really deal with ourselves. And we thought that, it creates a lot of disconnection. And so we decided that we wanted to design these solutions that we ourselves use in our own lives, and that are independently verified and certified. And so we called it our skin in the game philosophy, that we really want to be attached to this. And I've personally changed that in recent years. I call it my Lucia philosophy, because Lucia is my 9-year-old daughter. And if I'm ever questioning, if there's ever any hesitation about whether or not I would give this water to my own daughter, then we're doing something wrong. Another principle that we formed, it's very simple. Live where we work. I know it's very revolutionary, but the idea was that, again, a lot of this development work, it tends to be very disconnected, out of an office in New York or Denver, where I was at the time, and jumping back and forth, and you can't really ground yourself in the local context and culture. So we decided that we really wanted to define an area and work to develop solutions for that specific region, but also do so in a way that other people can replicate it in other parts of Mexico and the world. And so that's when I decided to move to Mexico permanently. And the third thing I just want to mention here, because I think it's the most important principle that we've taken through all of these years, and that's we decided that we're no longer going to be entering vulnerable communities directly, like what I was doing in Chiapas. We're going to instead link up with different grassroots organizations, community leaders, and over the years it's turned out to be almost exclusively women, community leaders who hold these processes. And we're not going to define the problems ourselves. Instead, we're going to listen and try to help support those existing initiatives. And so when we started listening back in 2010, 2011, the answer to the problem was always water. There's not enough water, and it's really contaminated. There had been some studies done in the early 2000s that had found excessive levels of arsenic and fluoride in the drinking water here in the region. And that's where I saw really quickly where we could fit in and provide some support. So without really knowing anything about water at the time, we started reaching out to different hydrologists, university groups, and we started linking them up with these community groups, and we all just started going out and testing water quality around the region. And what we found was absolutely horrific. We found arsenic today more than 23 times above the allowable limit in certain communities, fluoride 18 times above the limit. And without getting too specific on it, these are just two really nasty chemicals. They're both on the top 10 list of the World Health Organization's 10 chemicals of most public health concern globally right now. And they deeply impact public health, especially children. Fluoride impacts teeth. It's really healthy at certain levels, but at those levels, it's very detrimental. It deteriorates teeth, bones, cognitive development and learning disabilities in children. Arsenic is tied to several types of cancer. We're currently doing a study right now with the National Public Health Institute of Mexico and Columbia University that's looking at kidney damage in children specifically because of these water contaminants. But anyway, what we were doing in those first couple years was essentially just going out and testing wells and testing water quality and then bringing that information back, because people were telling us that, someone had been here and they had tested our well, but they never told us what was going on. So we thought, okay, we're going to do better. We're going to go back and give them that information. And so I remember one of the times early on, we didn't really have a big staff at Caminos de Agua, so I was doing a bit of everything. And I was on one of these trips returning information, water quality information to one of these communities. It's a small community about an hour from San Miguel called Cabaña del Rey. And their fluoride levels were about 5 times above the limit, and their arsenic levels were 10 times above the limit. And it turns out that arsenic and fluoride are also incredibly difficult to remove from the water. And at that point in time, all we really had to offer people was buying bottled water, which was also potentially contaminated as well. So imagine hearing this for the first time. You're out there, you've probably, like in this community specifically, they fought for decades to get that well drilled in the first place. And then we're coming back and telling you, by the way, this is what's causing what you see in your children's teeth right now in this community. You can't drink it. And I didn't think about it, but we had this university group from, I think it was Texas, well, it doesn't matter, from a university, and one of the students happened to speak Spanish. And so I thought, why don't you give the results back this time? And I didn't think about those dynamics, right? And so this poor kid, about 20 years old at the time, is giving the results back to this community. And this older woman kind of stood up and she said, I'm taking care of my grandson. The parents aren't in the picture, we didn't ask why, but she said, what am I supposed to do? I can't afford to buy bottled water. What am I supposed to do for my grandchildren? Can he drink from this well? I don't know what to do. And obviously the student was like stunned, and I was stunned, and I didn't know how to respond. But as you can imagine, over those couple years, this became a really depressing and discouraging process of giving people really bad information without tangible solutions. So that's when we started focusing on creating alternatives here at Caminos de Agua, and we didn't create anything ourselves at the beginning. We really follow the lead of others, specifically like groups like Midday Rotary Club here in San Miguel, who's done tons of work on rainwater, because what we found was that given how hard arsenic and fluoride are to remove, it was easier to look for a different source of water. So rain is inherently free of those contaminants. You have to include a simple bacteria filter so that can be drinkable, but that combination creates a really clean source of drinking water. So that was the technical solution that we jumped into. But it wasn't just about building systems. We also had to address the social. And we had to formulate new philosophies. And the best way I can explain it, I always think of our community projects coordinator who's been with us in some form or another for about 10 years now, Saul Juarez, who was also, by the way, a former recipient of UU support many years ago. But he says, people are the experts in their own lives, and they're their agents of their own change. And that's how we kind of formulated that idea, is that we don't make decisions regarding these projects. We trust our grassroots partners, our community organizations we work with. We trust their decisions, and with that, we're trying to do something more than only provide clean water. And so one story about this is I think about one of those first communities we ever worked in to build rainwater systems. It's a community called San Antonio de Lourdes, and about an hour and a half from here in San Miguel. And this is a community, it's a mid-sized community, about 80 families or about 350 people. And they're right next to this big agricultural production that had been sucking up so much water that this community's well completely dried up and collapsed in on itself. So they've been going at that time, about 8 or 9 years without having any water in their community. So what did they do is they went to the agricultural production next door where they were gifted water on a regular basis. They could take that water, and that water happened to be some of the most contaminated water we ever tested. The fluoride jumped out at me. I remember the first time I saw the spreadsheet, it was at 17. The limit for fluoride is 1, so that means it was 17 times above the limit, and the arsenic was 6 or 7 times above the limit. And so we built those first rainwater systems, some of the first rainwater systems in that community, about 10 or 20, 25 systems, something like that. And I remember being at the inauguration party, which is a very important part of this process, and it's where I mostly show up nowadays, is to the party. And the people, the families who were there, they were at this part where they're saying what they were thankful for. Now remember, this community had no water, and now these 20 some odd families had rainwater systems on their homes, and not only that, but there was water in those systems. And so the first time in many years, they had water at their homes. And as they were talking about what they were thankful for, not a single person mentioned the word water. It was stunning to me. And I was listening to what they were saying, and they were talking about what it was like to work together, what it was like to get to know their neighbors and build those relationships. They talked about how hard the work was, but what it was like to learn to do things that they thought they could never do before. They talked about how they didn't always get along, but how the process was important, and it was a process that united them. And that was honestly the moment that I realized really what we're trying to do here. And I'm going to steal the words of one of our community partners, a community leader named Lucha Villafuerte, who said way early on, and I didn't get it until this moment, but that we're not just building rainwater systems, we're building community. And that's why our mission in Caminos de Agua is not directly about water. Our mission is to improve human health and community well-being through adequate and affordable access to clean water. So that moment has repeated itself many, many times over the years. After those 20-some-odd systems we did in San Antonio, we've worked in about 140 different rural communities here in our watershed, again, together with these grassroots and these community partners, building about 1,400 rainwater harvesting systems. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention some of the other things that we're doing, because as important as rainwater has been to this entire process, especially for water security for those most impacted by what's happening here in our region, it's not enough, and it was never going to be enough. We always knew that. Rainwater is relatively expensive to install at the level we need to here in a semi-arid environment. We need to capture and store a whole lot of water per family. And so that's why in Caminos, many, many years ago, we started developing what we call our groundwater treatment system, which is a challenge that we've been doing with other partners, our university and academic partners, to remove arsenic and fluoride at the entire community scale. Now, I'm really happy to say that after these many years of development, we have 2 of these systems in operation. We just inaugurated the biggest one we've done to date just a few months ago, in a community called Alonso Yanez, where the fluoride levels are more than 5 times above the allowable limit. And this is providing access to that entire community of about 1,500 people, and it's doing so about 8 to 10 times cheaper than if we were trying to do it with rainwater. The most innovative thing about all of this, though, is that it is community-owned and operated, and that's what we've been really trying to work on here in Caminos de Agua. The technology is very cool. I think it's very, very interesting, but again, the social part is what makes this really interesting. And so just to say, right now in that community, one of the stories that I love about this is a young woman named Luz. In 2019, I think, she was in high school, and she was working with our organization at a local high school on a rainwater harvesting project. And today, 4 years later, she's the first paid operator of one of these community-scale treatment plants. And that's really what we're looking for, is that these are completely community-owned and operated and economically sustainable over time. So today, after all these years of working on these issues, we're doing all sorts of things to train new generations. We're working with municipal government to train their workers, not only on the technical aspects of things like rainwater harvesting, but the social aspects of how you do this work and make it impactful over the long term. We're working to develop these community committees to run these treatment plants, but also alongside our grassroots community partners as well as other NGOs. We've just launched what we call our water school program, which is going to train, right now we have 40 youth who have already signed up. These are 15 to 25-year-olds who are gonna work with us, with our team, as well as all these other partners over the next 2 years to help build this new generation of community organizers and environmental stewards to help push this work forward into the future. And that also happens to be what UU is helping us with this year. So thank you so much for that support. Now, I'm starting to wrap up here, and I want to come back to one of Paula's questions, because I'm not sure I fully addressed it, but she said, what keeps you going in the face of disappointments? And it's not only just disappointments, or perhaps the biggest disappointment, I guess we could say, is really the scope of all of this. It's what I think about a lot, how massive these problems are, how we deal with these really big systemic nature of all of this work, and that's very discouraging. But what keeps me going is really thinking about the real people who are affected and the real things that we can do right now with them, not for them, to help improve lives and improve communities. I think about a young woman named Pasquala. She was in one of our early water projects, and we visited her, I think about 5 or 6 years later to kind of see what the impact had been on her family. And she said, well, look at my oldest son. He's in high school, he's a teenager, and his teeth are completely ruined for life. I mean, he's been completely decimated. But my younger children, they all grew up on filtered rainwater, and their teeth are strong. So I asked that question of what keeps me going, and it comes back to that UU principle of the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And of course, it brings me back to my grandfather, right? Am I doing something to help improve the lives of real people every day, or am I missing the point? So I just want to end now with someone else's words, because Caminos de Agua is not me, and the work we do in Caminos de Agua is not even Caminos de Agua. It's really this massive collective tapestry of actors, not only these grassroots and community partners, but university and academic partners, other NGOs, government foundations, individual donors, and all of you here in UU are honestly a big part of this bigger community that we've been trying to build. Most importantly, it is the communities themselves that we serve. They're not victims of charity, they are our partners in this work, and they're agents of their own change. So I want to end with their words. We do this thing in Caminos de Agua called narrative practices. It's a community organizational technique. It's something that I personally admire from afar from my staff who are very well trained in this, and I hope I don't butcher the explanation here. But they do this thing, and it's a lot of different things. But one is building what's called the collective voice. And what that is taking all these different individuals and these different groups who are working on this and taking their real words, but putting them all together as one voice. And we ask them, what is it that they want to share? And so I have a lot, but I'm just going to share some of their words that they honestly wanted to share with all of you here today. So, I've put in good work, even though my hands are not in good shape, because they're not only my hands, but the hands of the whole group. My hands and those of everyone else. I have to try. And I tell them, in whatever way we can, we have to help each other, because each of us has different weaknesses. But together we can support each other and motivate one another. The strength of the whole group supports the weakness of one. This is the strength of all hands. In each one, I am recognizing the strength of all. For me, all hands make a difference. I used to say I couldn't do it. And now, how many systems have we already built? A lot. In my community, we've been working in groups, so I say it is possible. We can do it. With a little wishful thinking and hope. We dream it, and now our dreams are becoming reality. Not by myself. The strength comes from all of us. Maybe us older people won't be able to enjoy it, but I don't do it for that. I do it for my grandchildren, who are already drinking safe water. That's my hope, that I will be able to leave my work with them. I think about all of this because building a rainwater system is a lot of work. It's physically exhausting. But if I only focused on this, I wouldn't be able to grow. I don't want to only build a rainwater system. I want to build a community. Thank you. Sorry, just one more shameless plug, but if you guys want to know more, again, there'll be the Q&A, and we also have these flyers out here which have some information on the back, and if you fill one of those out or go to the website, we will send you much more information that might be more personally pertinent to all of you. Thank you again.